Good morning, everyone. My name is David Edick. I'm president of the San Diego World Affairs Council, and welcome to today's presentation. Today, we'll hear from Professor Ahmet Kuru on the implications of Turkey's political crisis. There's a lot of that going on right now, huh? So while the Western world has been caught up in the controversies and turbulence of Trump 2.0, the NATO country of Turkey has been shaken by a major political crisis. Sustained protests began throughout Turkey on March 19th, following the arrest of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu and more than 100 other opposition members and protesters by Turkish authorities. And that number of arrests has expanded considerably from that number. Who is Ekrem İmamoğlu, and why was he arrested? What is the symbolism of the Pokémon character Pikachu in the protest? Recep Tayyip Erdogan has served as Turkey's prime minister from 2003 to 2014, and now president since 2014. What is the outlook for Turkey's domestic political situation? Will the crisis impact Erdogan's domestic and international authority and legacy? Today, to discuss this complicated and timely topic is San Diego State political science professor Ahmet Kuru. Indeed, Professor Kuru is a political science professor at San Diego State, and he's also the director of the Center for Islamic and Arabic Studies at San Diego State University. He was a postdoc scholar at Columbia University. He's the author of Secularism and State Policies Toward Religion, the United States, France, and Turkey as case studies, which received the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion Book Award. He's also co-editor of Democracy, Islam, and Secularism in Turkey. Kuru's articles appear in various journals, including World Politics, Comparative Politics, and Political Science Quarterly. He's getting a lot of airtime on YouTube, Facebook, and elsewhere as he travels the world to talk about his recent books, in particular being Islam, Authoritarianism, and Underdevelopment, a global and historical comparison. That was a co-winner of the American Political Science Association's International History and Politics Section Award and received honorable mention of the SSR's award, and was included in the Times Literary Supplement Book of the Year for 2022. The Times Literary Supplement stated, quote, Kuru puts forward a bold new theory, arguing that from the 11th century onwards, the alliance of religious orthodoxy with heavily militarized states gradually stifled intellectual and economic creativity. The progressive free thinkers and independent entrepreneurs were marginalized, leading the Arab world to undermine its own future. This groundbreaking book has been translated into Indonesian, Arabic, Persian, Bosnian, Dutch, French, German, Malay, Urdu, Bangla, Uzbek, and Kyrgyz. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Ahmet Kuru.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure to having a conversation with you, and always I'm honored to be invited by the San Diego World Affairs Council. And as you said, we are in an international turmoil now, and Turkey has its own problems. And I want to briefly mention my understanding of what is going on. Then we'll have a Q&A and hopefully lively debate. So my connection to Turkey is both business and personal. I was born there. I'm very attached to Turkey emotionally. Of course, we like the happiness of everyone, but I consider Turkey as a crucial case, not only the typical cliche of the bridge between East and West, but also having something on the table it can bring to the table, how to combine secular state with Muslim society, how to make a Muslim society member of European Union, what are the challenges of Middle East, and then how Europe can learn from Turkey or may integrate Turkey to help it to understand the migration and other issues. So to make the long story short, I was very optimistic until 2013. And the last 10 years, I saw a lot happening in terms of transformations in Turkey. And one thing everyone now is talking about is how Turkey was an early example of the rise of right-wing populism. And this is very telling for American audience now, because in social science, we have a debate whether agency or structure matters. Whether you look at leaders like Trump, Erdogan, Putin, Modi, Le Pen, Netanyahu, as the motor of engine of change, or we consider them as a result of a bigger structural transformation, such as social media technologies, which help anti-elitism emerge. Then democracy became mostly a mobocracy, following the mob and the popular tendencies. And meanwhile, the inequality, because of neoliberal policies and capitalism, the inequality between rich and poor is expanding. And all of this contribute populism worldwide. But there is another important dimension which helps the populist leaders succeed, which is their ability to bring together religious and nationalist forces. So I'm writing a new book about this combination, and basically I say that nationalism historically emerged in the 18th, 19th, 20th century, from Europe to United States, from Turkey to other parts of Asia, as a competitor of religious orthodoxy, religious authority like the Pope or the Caliph in the Muslim world. And nationalists say we have nationalist leaders like Mustafa Kemal Atatürk of Turkey or George Washington and others. And nationalists defend verticalization of language. Instead of Latin in Europe, Italian, Greek, German, Spanish, English, and other local languages. And instead of Arabic as the Muslim madrasa language and Persian Muslim literature language, they want verticalization, especially Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's secularist reform in Turkey after the foundation of Turkish Republic in 1923, meant to bring Turkish language in a superior position and eliminating even the Arabic and Persian originated terms. And the nationalists and Islamists also had a deep fight on education, whereas in the Muslim world, especially in the case of Turkey, secular nationalists led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk shut down madrasas. It was very radical. It was not an evolutionary smooth process, but by single law, they shut down about 500 madrasas in the country. And they completely eliminated Islamic law, Sharia, and bringing laws from multiple European sources, German criminal law, Italian commercial law, and then Swiss civil law, so on and so forth. But when we look at today, we see that Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, the president of Turkey, has a coalition with Nationalist Action Party. So Islamists and nationalists are together. And that is a new power alliance emerged in Turkey in the last 10 years. but we see it in many countries. In the United States, Republican agenda and Republican coalition include not only capitalist billionaires, but also religious forces and nationalist forces. For example, according to exit polls in the recent presidential election, 85% of people unaffiliated, saying they have no religion, voted for Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, whereas 70-75% of Protestant evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, which show us the importance of religion, even in America, despite a more secular society than it is in Turkey. And in Turkey, this polarization, Islamist versus secular polarization, persists despite the fact that the Islamist party of Tayyip Erdogan established a successful coalition with the Nationalist Action Party. Now, who is İmamoğlu? Why is he important? Why is his arrest led to hundreds of thousands of people protesting? Because İmamoğlu is a very unique politician who is able to bring together Islamic and secularist voters in Turkey. He is now the presidential candidate of Atatürk's funded secularist Republican People's Party. But at the same time, İmamoğlu, the Istanbul mayor, coming from a religiously observant family, he is able to go to mosque and pray the Quran in Arabic. He is making gesture to women with headscarves. He is not the typical secularist in Turkey defending headscarf ban a la French laïcité, or regarding religion as a source of backwardness. So in this background, let me summarize what I have told already. So Turkey is important, not only as a bridge country between East and West, as a leading Muslim majority country, but also it is a case for Americans, Europeans, and others to understand how populism works, how populist leaders like Erdogan came to power, and what are the sources of challenge them. So an important point I emphasize so far is that populist leaders bring together religion and nationalism, which makes their followers very much dedicated if they are nationalists and religious, and which makes their coalition very deep and strong. So the alternative, what we can do, if you name yourself liberal, Democrat, who is not happy with right-wing populism, what can you do? In the Turkish case, for 20 years, opposition failed to bring a popular candidate against Erdogan. Opposition generally repeat the old cliche of secularism, saying that, oh, we have to defend the legacy of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. We don't like Turkey becoming like Afghanistan, Taliban type. And they don't see the point that Erdogan is a very strategic, pragmatic politician. So undermining the politician is one of the biggest mistakes the opposition until now has done again and again. And since I am making comparison with the United States, I will say that Democrats generally undermine Trump from the very beginning to until today. So you should never undermine the capacity, pragmatism, coalition ability of a populist leader. If you do it at your perils. So in the case of Turkey, finally, two popular candidates in the opposition emerged. One became the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. The other became mayor of Ankara, the capital city, Mansur Yavaş. And between the two, Erdogan specifically targeted Istanbul mayor because he is much smarter in his political maneuvers and strategies. He has a broader appeal to both secular and Islamist voters, and he won Istanbul 3 times. And Erdogan was saying for many years, whomever win in Istanbul, win in Turkey. That's why he knows that İmamoğlu has the great potential to win Turkish presidential election whenever it happens in the next 2-3 years. Erdogan now is 72 years old. İmamoğlu is 53, so almost 2 decades younger. Erdogan doesn't have a crown prince, a successor. That's why he wants to lift the presidential limits on the constitution of Turkey. And that's why he wants to run again and again, maybe 10 more years, rule Turkey after 22 years having ruled Turkey. He wants to rule God knows how many more years. And then let me conclude my brief presentation with this question. Are we going to see the repetition of history? Because Tayyip Erdogan in 1994 was elected the mayor of Istanbul. He was young. He was a challenger to the status quo and establishment. And establishment was worried about him and they put him in prison. So he was like İmamoğlu 30 years ago. Now İmamoğlu, as a young popular mayor of Istanbul, was in prison by the establishment, a deja vu. Would that tell us that İmamoğlu can easily repeat the success and political achievement of Erdogan? My answer, unfortunately, is no. Unfortunately, for those who want to see a change in Turkey, which may help Turkey be more democratic, promote rule of law, and even economically recover, because the economy is a mess, 50% or more inflation, and the poverty level is getting deeper. My answer is no, because we live in a different world now. 25, 30 years ago, when the Turkish establishment, mostly secularist military, secularist judiciary, secularist media, they were targeting Erdogan and tried to prevent his leadership in Turkey, the word was different. It was a word where European Union and United States were supporting democracy. Not anymore. No need to explain why United States no longer care about democracy anywhere. But it is also true about Europeans, because Europe in the last 10 years focused on immigration, see Turkey as a barrack of European security system in terms of stopping immigrants. Europeans gave legitimacy and support to Erdogan. They gave him money in order to keep immigrants in Turkey, the border. And now, with the fact that Trump administration is no longer dedicated to NATO, Europe is trying to establish its own security system. And this is, once again, a good convenient condition for President Erdogan, because Europeans treat Turkey now, in addition to a barrier of stopping immigration, they now see Turkey as a stockpile of soldiers. So Turkey, with a large army, can be used as a military ally, regardless whether it is more authoritarian or less. So under these circumstances, for İmamoğlu, there is no international support. There is no Bush administration, which provides substantial leverage to Erdogan. There is no European Union, European institutions. So everything depends on the domestic opposition, young people who protest on the street. If they keep supporting İmamoğlu, maybe there will be change, he will be released and then able to compete and win the election of Turkey's presidency. And one more thing is economy. As I mentioned, economy is very fragile. During the week, İmamoğlu's college degree was canceled after 35 years. He was put in prison, and there was a possibility to virtually shut down the main opposition party. Turkish lira lost rapidly its value, and Turkish central bank had to spend half of its invested dollars. They spent about $28 billion to stop the depreciation of Turkish lira. The Turkish stock exchange get down 10%, maybe lower. And that gave the signal to the Erdogan regime that they cannot keep pushing more authoritarian rules. And this is the dilemma. We don't know how Erdogan will deal with this dilemma. But this is Turkey in a very much turmoil in a world which is in crisis. So this is my brief presentation. I'll be happy to answer if there are any questions. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Ahmet. It's very interesting presentations. I think some very useful points you raised. In your presentation, you mentioned I think you're suggesting that the opposition in Turkey and the Democrats in the United States underestimate, not undermine, but that they're underestimating the capacity and the pragmatism, certainly of Erdogan. So in the weeks that have passed since this explosion of protests burst out, it seems to have reached it continues. The protest continues. Mostly young people. I'm curious as to the role of social media, and does the symbolism of Pikachu, does the use of that symbolism in social media offer some sort of lesson for future protests at all, driven from social media?
Thank you, Dave. And I think you asked two very important questions. Let me answer very briefly. First of all, yes, you're right that what I'm trying to say is they were both underestimating, because I remember Jon Stewart, after coming back to Comedy Central, he made the joke that Democrats, on the one hand, saying that barbarians are at the gate and they are coming in the election, but at the same time he said, if barbarians are coming, you need Conan or a warrior. You can't compete with them, with Biden, with so little performance, and then you need a stronger candidate. So the Turkish opposition did the same. So they, instead of nominating İmamoğlu in 2023 elections, they said Erdogan is a lost case. We will win with any candidate. Then they show a very unpopular candidate, Kılıçdaroğlu. They underestimate Erdogan, then they lost. And in the Democratic case here, no need to repeat how the Biden and Harris, without any primary, without a strong candidate, Democrats tried to win, and they lost. And the second issue, the Pikachu and others show, it's a Zen generation, young generation. And this young generation are less fearful than the old people in Turkey. So of course, I'm making a generalization. There are very courageous old people like myself, or there may be some fearful young people, but overall, this is a young people coming on the street and they say enough is enough, despite the fact that their parents say don't go, they will be put in prison, they will kick you out of university, they will end your education. The young people say we don't have anything to lose, and we don't want to live 10 more years with Erdogan leadership. So this is a generational shift. That's why Pikachu and other symbols are important. And Erdogan doesn't know how to deal with, because previously, 10 years ago, when there were Gezi event, he defined them as marginal Alevis. So there was a sectarian definition of the popular protest, and the message was for majority Sunni conservative people, stay at home, don't join, or even you can attack the protesters because this is a marginal religious sect. But today, with this protest, it's impossible because it's much more cross-cultural participation we are seeing. We are seeing secular people, religious people, conservative AKP, parents, children are joining the protest.
Interesting. Uh, for everyone on the call, this is an opportunity to ask a question. Please indicate your interest in asking a question or write your question in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to continue forward with some questions of my own here, if you don't mind. In recent months, the jailed Kurdish leader Öcalan has come back into Turkish politics in a way on the invitation of Erdogan. How does this uh, generational conflict with the Kurds and with Öcalan, how does this fit into the current situation, if at all?
That's a great follow-up question because from Erdogan point of view, he had two advantages. One is the fall of Assad regime in Damascus and the coming of more Turkey-friendly Shara regime. And they presented initially this as a Turkish victory. And even Trump now presenting a Turkish victory, saying that Turks tried to get Damascus for 2,000 years. Probably he doesn't know that Turks ruled Damascus from 1500 to 1900, by the way. So the second thing, the process of rapprochement between the Turkish state and Kurdish PKK and its leader, Öcalan, and even the coalition partner of Erdogan, Nationalist Action Party leader, said we should invite Öcalan to give a speech in the parliament. So I assume with these two advantage, Erdogan thinks that it's time, very good timing to eliminate İmamoğlu. And people, when outsiders and insiders say that Turkey is becoming more authoritarian, he could easily say, no, look, we are having peace with Kurds is historic. And then for those who say, oh, we are sinking economically, politically, no, look, we conquered Damascus. But his calculations was completely proven wrong because, as I said again, this for the young generation, Öcalan and the peace with him means nothing. Because the fight between PKK and Turkish state is important for my generation. Because we grew up in 1990s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, seeing how the Kurdish militia and Turkish soldiers killing each other, there was bloodshed. For someone at the age of 15, 20, 25, this means nothing. And Öcalan is an old guy, Erdogan is old guy, 75, 75. If they have a rapprochement, that's their issue. It doesn't bring anything to the daily life of the young people who are unemployed, who are unhappy, who want freedom, economic prosperity, and other demands. And then the Syria issue. Now in Turkey, there is general consensus that the main architect of the change in Syria is Israel. And Israel is occupying certain part of southern Syria. Israel is bombing wherever it wants. And when Turkey tried to establish a military bases in Syria, Israel destroyed by bombing. So Turkey has a very limited leverage. It does have some leverage, but definitely it's not the conquest of Damascus. No, Syria is becoming an independent Arab country itself, with Kurds having some autonomy. Turkey has some leverage, but Israel seems to be a bigger leverage than Turkey. Therefore, it's not a success story for Erdogan either. So he has no narrative now. Then either the Syria or Kurdish issue will not bring him enough narrative to stay in power 10 more years.
Very interesting. There is a question here. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, please go ahead with your question.
Ahmed, thank you again. That was a wonderful discussion. So I was wondering if we could discuss, we could bring in now Trump into this equation and, Trump's plans for uh, the victims in Gaza. Can you kind of bring us up to date in terms of the Trump-Erdogan relationship? Why would Erdogan entertain bringing in anyone from Gaza? And how does this relate to what the EU did with Turkey vis-a-vis the Syrian refugees?
Thanks, Ibrahim. It's always great to have you in any conversation. So this is a very complex issue, and throughout my life, I try to avoid conspiracy theories. But at the end, conspiracy theories on certain issues seems to be relevant. And on this issue, the opposition now has a conspiracy theory, which is so a fact and a conspiracy theory. The fact is that they say before İmamoğlu was arrested by Erdogan regime, the Erdogan administration had contact with Americans, and they got the green light. And certain American senators approve it in some videos interview saying that yes, they asked to America and America gave some green lights. But the conspiracy part is that why are we seeing so good relations between the two? Why is President Trump 2 days ago saying that Erdogan is a great guy, he admire him, love him deeply? Of course, an element of this love relations is the global populism I briefly mentioned. But a deeper down, there is a discussion in Turkey now that Trump proposed Turkey to receive large number of Palestinians from Gaza, and then Erdogan administration seems to be willing. And now in some Islamist TV channels and newspapers, pro-Erdogan Islamists open a new debate saying that if our Palestinian brothers want to do hijrah, which basically means a holy migration, holy immigration, they want to come here from Gaza, of course, we will open our arms and embrace them. But everybody knows that this is not a religious thing. This is an issue. If it happens, then everyone and historians will write it how Erdogan, in exchange of certain political leverage, agree with Trump's plan to eradicate Palestinians from Gaza.
Wow, we bounced from one biggie to another. There are a couple additional questions in the chat box. I'm going to move on to those. Excellent question, Ibrahim. Bob Ning asks, in the situation of irreconcilable differences between the religious and secular, Pakistan evolved to military leadership for peace. Can there be such a development in Turkey?
So Turkey is different from Pakistan because Turkey has a longer period of constitutional regime, parliamentary regime, and a much higher level of literacy and education. But on the other hand, there are similarities between Turkey and Pakistan. And a major similarity is the fact that Pakistan had a border with Afghanistan and its civil war, which brought Islamists into power and so many problems transfer from Afghan civil war and the occupation of Afghanistan, etc., to Pakistan. Same thing is now happening in Turkey. First, Iraq was occupied as Turkey's neighbor with America. And after we invaded Iraq, Iraq became safe haven for terrorist groups like ISIS. Then came Syrian civil war, collapse of state, terrorism, radicalism, jihadism, and everything in Syria. Obviously, Turkey has been very negatively affected. So I don't know where this will go. And now there are alternative scenarios. One alternative is the rise of secularist generation. We are seeing this in Saudi Arabia to some extent now, and deeper level, Iran. Young people becoming not only embracing secular lifestyle, but some of them become clearly anti-Islam because of the theocratic regime and their hatred of the theocratic regime. Will Turkey take an assertive secularist or anti-Islamist stand in the future? That is one possibility. Another possibility is the robustness of some sort of Islamism, and every country has its own way of Islamism, because Islamism came in Iran with a revolution, in Afghanistan by Taliban regime, in Pakistan more bottom up, etc. And in Turkey, some populist Islamist regime came to power by elections. The constitution is still secular in Turkey, but the courts and the public debates embrace more Islamic rhetorics, and one can be easily arrested by the blasphemy charge now in Turkey, which wasn't the case 10 to 15 years ago. And I don't know which direction future will tell us. Time tell.
Thank you. The next question coming from Anita. Does Gulanism matter anymore in Turkey?
No, it doesn't mean anything now, because it's a very complex issue I wrote about, but let me briefly mention. Gulanism was based on the belief in a one man, Fethullah Gulen. And the man died without a clear successor, without a clear legacy, and so many problems and hatred against him in Turkey. That's why, first of all, they have no future in Turkey. Globally, would that matter? Not as a small group, yes, they may survive globally, but not anymore the important role they were playing in Turkey 10 to 15 years ago. It's like Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt to some extent.
Well, that opens the door to a much bigger conversation. Are you sure? I mean, we could be here a long time, because I think actually that's, would you be willing to expand on that a little bit?
So I wrote an article 5 years ago comparing Gülenists and Muslim Brothers. It was widely translated, read, and discussed, and both groups hate the article because the Gülenist says we are not political Islamists, we are civil society, how dare you compare us with them? Muslim Brothers says we are a victim of a coup in Egypt, and Gülenist perpetrated a coup attempt in Turkey. How dare you compare us with them? But comparison, it doesn't supposed to be comparing two similar things. I also emphasize the differences, right? So, but basically the argument is that both groups became very powerful. Then they became persecuted minorities, because there is a clear persecution of Gülenists in Turkey and Muslim Brothers in Egypt. Their property rights are not protected. They can easily be jailed as terrorists. So this is the persecution. That's what I compared.
Okay. Well, then it opens the door to those groups represented ideas, and what is the legacy of those ideas?
And one thing I want to say about the ideas, in terms of basic ideas, AKP constituency and Gülenists are very same. I would say 99%. The main disagreement was about who would be the leader, Erdogan or Gülen. Other than that, they are Sunni Turks, their notion of Ottoman nostalgia, their critique of secularism, everything. So that's why there was a very strong collaboration between the two, until the fight about who would be the leader, your leader or my leader, something like that.
Thank you.
This is a topic of another Zoom.
Well, I'm gonna come back to some of this stuff,
Okay.
but I mean, indeed, for both the Gulenists and for the Muslim Brotherhood, they're in the rearview mirror. But where do we go from here? And so I'll
Yeah.
come back to that. I want to get to James' question in the chat. Could you discuss Turkey's relations with Russia? And let's approach it from one Ankara's perspective, Erdogan's, and how does the public see that relationship?
First of all, when it comes to foreign policy, public opinion, it does not matter, or it matters very little, because for the pro-AKP, pro-Erdogan public, they are very easily manipulated by the media, party propaganda, and the leaders. If Erdogan says, I am against Sisi of Egypt, the president Sisi, then AKP people hate Sisi. And then next day, if Erdogan says, I become friend of Sisi, they say, oh, we are ready to forget the hatred. So the constituency in terms of foreign policy is easily manipulated. The only thing they cannot be manipulated is domestic politics and especially economy, because it's a hardcore issue. If you are poor, and you see the value of your money and then your wealth is declining, you may be more aware of the result. That's why Erdogan's party lost recent municipal election because of economic crisis. But in terms of foreign policy, they easily manipulate. And they don't care what the opposition people generally think. The Russia policy surprised me because uh, as someone lived during the Cold War, I was very much worried about Soviet expansionism, which is now a Russian expansionism. So my ancestors, for example, came from Crimea. And then when Russia occupied Crimea, then Russia came to Syria and killed a number of Turkish soldiers in Syria. And Russia was once again pursuing an imperialist agenda. I saw that as very dangerous for Turkish security and Turkish interests in the region. But Erdogan saw a different angle point, and he tried to use Russia to balance the power of United States. And that's how he positioned himself even during the Ukraine war. Uh, he didn't take a clearly anti-Russian position, instead tried to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. And these are very much contextual things, because on the one hand, you may see that now Erdogan no longer needs balancing Russia with the US, because Trump administration and Russia now are friends. We live in a different world now. But until now, that was Erdogan's strategy.
Got it.
And I know your interest in Russia. You know more than I do on this issue.
Yeah, I think the level of understanding in DC about the people in the Kremlin is pretty limited. And because of the turbulence, I think the Kremlin is wary. But your point about Erdogan playing off bigger powers to benefit
Mhm,
Turkey's position, his position,
mhm,
I think is completely relevant.
mhm,
So since the arrival into power of Trump 2.0, the world has been reordering this at just an extraordinary pace, certainly reflective of the pace around the breakup of the East and the
mhm,
dissolution of the Soviet Union, the same velocity, the
mhm,
same profound changes in terms of scale uh, and import. Um, so with clearly a break between the United States and Europe, which is accelerating. Uh, Turkey has a customs agreement with the European Union. They never got into the Union, and clearly not going to happen. But they
Yeah.
have a customs agreement, which means they can trade freely manufacturers into the European Union market. Do you see that commercial relationship continuing in this turbulent period as the Europeans try to figure out where they're going?
Interestingly, this custom union came to my mind when we are discussing Trump's tariffs, because 15 years ago, when Turkey, maybe 20, 25 years ago, when Turkey signed the customs agreement, Turks had a concern that what if they never accept us to EU? Then we will accepting to be following the rules designed by others. We don't have a vote about the EU custom regulations. But in the last 20, 25 years, the custom union helped Turkish corporations to be more competitive, produce better products, having more reasonable price. That's why Turkey didn't leave the custom union. So, despite the fact that it's out of the decision-making mechanism, this is a very interesting point, because initially Turks said we only sign with the condition that we'll be one of the decision makers. Now they are not, but they still want to be in because they like the free trade. And then, but when the Trump imposed tariff, if they are permanent, there will be some influence, negative possibly, for Turkish commerce as well, in terms of the Turkey EU, so Turkey United States trade.
Yeah, this is going to be something to watch.
Yes.
I'm going to come to Michael's question, but I want to continue on with some threads here. NATO is becoming an apparition.
Mm.
That's a bold statement on my part, but I think the evidence this strongly supports that. Turkey is a member of NATO with other European countries. Turkey has not only a large standing military, Army, Air Force, Navy, but they also have a very substantial armaments industry, a military equipment industry. Looking at the Turkish media, or maybe some of the blogging and social media, maybe not so much out of Ankara or Erdogan, but from this chatty part of Turkish society, how do they see a future? Do they want a future in terms of military supplies? Does that fit into the customs union, or two-track being commercial and the other military?
So, this is a very interesting point regarding my recent Islam book's central thesis, because the book argues that Muslims had a vibrant economy and intellectual life from the 8th to 11th, 12th centuries, when they had some separation between clergy state and also some separation between bourgeoisie, more commercial class, and giving space to philosophers, polymaths. But after the 11th, 12th centuries, the Turkish nomadic warrior military empires, first the Seljuks, then the Ottomans. And the Safavids in Iran were also a Turkic military power. And I present this as a problem. Military ulema alliance, military state plus clergy. And we see throughout the Muslim world, in Egypt, military plus clergy. Pakistan, they call it military mullah nexus or military mullah alliance. And in the last 10 years or so, Erdogan is building strong military apparatus, strong clergy. And in this system, military clergy alliance, intellectuals completely marginalized. Dissenting intellectuals removed from their university positions, labeled as Kurdish, opposition, communist, Gülenist, whatever. And bourgeoisie is either marginalized, some of them their property is seized, or if they are pro-Erdogan, they lost any social political leverage and independence and autonomy. They became completely co-opted by the system. Now you see once again the military mullah alliance with the strong armed forces and the ulama. So I understand that you ask about the regional and international dimension, but I am a comparativist, and for me, always domestic politics matter. And I believe domestic politics eventually lead you to be internationally powerful or not. Look, United States, until the First and Second World War, United States was not a global power. In 1930s, militarily, United States was not in even the top list of 10 military powers around the globe. But United States opened the universities. It had strong bourgeoisie class. It had industry. It had everything to become a military power. And we will see now how Germany and Japan, thanks to Trump administration, will become once again military power in the next 5-10 years. But Turkey, despite all the investment, all the emphasis on military, will never match Japan, Germany, or first-rank countries because Turkey doesn't have a first-rank economy, doesn't have first-rank universities. That's why I see military as a result rather than the cause. You should start from education, economy, then eventually you have a strong military presence. Even for Russia, so you know Russia much better than me, but I don't see Russia will remain as an important first-rank military power, except nuke, because its economy is primitive now. Just rentier economy, selling gas and then weaponry. They need an economic reform to sustain their military status as first-rank geopolitical power. That's what I see. And that's what I see about Turkey.
Got it. Thank you. Moving on to the questions in the chat box. Michael asks, is there a haze of the Arab Spring hovering over Turkey? Is Erdogan feeling threatened by the opposition internally and externally? Good question about the Arab Spring. Is that a factor anymore anywhere?
Not anymore, because it has been a big disappointment. We were saying that Tunisia is where Arab Spring began and the only democracy it produced. But now, even in Tunisia, authoritarianism came back, no more democracy. This is very disappointing. For Turkey, it put civil wars and conflict in Turkey's border, make it bad. And it gave the false hope to Erdogan that he can become the leader of the Middle East and Arab countries, which is not possible, and it didn't work. And Turkey wasted 10 years with this. And finally, Erdogan understand that he couldn't become, he should be more humble. He cut deals with Saudis, UAE, Egypt. But why did we waste 10 years defending all the Islamist Muslim brothers, trying to establish an alliance with Qatar against UAE, Saudi, and Egypt? It didn't work. And the protests in the Turkish memory, it's the Gezi event. It's not the Arab Spring, but 10 years ago, more secular-leaning Turks protest in Istanbul and elsewhere. It was a major disruption at the time. And Erdogan was not in charge of the military at the time. The military generals were still strongly Kemalist. Not anymore now. Erdogan may have much deeper control over the military. But once again, he sees the protest. And can it trigger something like the Arab Spring? No, because today, Arabs, after the disappointment, I don't think there will be any popular opposition against regimes in the next 5-10 years.
Thank you. Kabir asks, what is Imamoglu's view of the genocide in Gaza? Would he be more or less sympathetic and effective in regard to the attainment of a free Palestine?
So there is a consensus in Turkey in the for the both administration people, opposition people, what is going on in Gaza, a genocide and killing of the Palestinians, unacceptable, and Turkey should do something. But if Imamoglu comes to power, will he be sharply different from Erdogan? I don't know, because it depends on many conditions and political constraints. But one thing clear is that no one used Palestine issue as a political discourse more than Erdogan. So this is Erdogan's signature rhetoric, Palestinians, Gaza, and everything for the last 25 years. So in this regard, I am very disappointed to see him doing almost nothing. If Imamoglu or another politician came to power and they do nothing, you can't blame them because Israel and United States are too powerful. But you can blame Erdogan because he used this rhetoric for 25 years and he should have done something.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up a little wider, open the lens up a little wider to a regional look. So we're in this period of intense and very rapid change. And a country can benefit by holding its own while others are destroying themselves or otherwise facing challenges. Within the Islamic world, let me put it that way, in the greater Middle East, where is the intellectual leadership today?
And you are asking about intellectual leadership in terms of political opposition, political project for the future?
Okay, so
yeah,
cultural, literature, arts, media, television media.
Sure. So I can only say, and some broad observations. I recently, so in the last 3 years, I visited Morocco and Bosnia in the Muslim majority cases of the Balkans and North Africa. And then I went Saudi Arabia for Hajj last summer. And I spent 5 days in UAE. But I am holding very strong ties because I have a column at Al Jazeera Arabic. So I'm writing monthly columns there and I'm getting the people's reactions. And I also have a column in a Turkish online portal where I also write monthly. So that's why I try to keep my ties strong with Arabic and Turkish readers. I also have strong ties with Malaysia, but unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, the Islamic Council of Malaysia banned my books. So they include my books into a dozen of banned books, defining them as potentially confusing Muslim minds. So if Muslims read my books, they will get confused about religion. So that's the idea. But it helped me to get more connection with Malaysia. I gave interviews, tried to explain my case. So regarding your question, there is a general decline of intellectualism in America, in the Muslim world, all around the world. And I see 3 reasons. One reason is social media. So I am very active social media. Dave, you and I, we have some social media friendships. It has very positive sides, but it also has very negativity. So social media make people's addicted to short clips, videos, instead of deep understanding of phenomena by reading books, following true arts, and others. And with new AI and fake technology, we lost the boundary between fake and truth. So this technology, social media, they're coming with many opportunities, but challenges. And young people, I think they are addicted to smartphones, short videos, and they have harder time to read and then contemplate literature and art. That's one thing. Another thing linked to that, politics. Look at the politicians we elect. Look at the politicians who rule us. From West to Middle East, from Middle East to Asia. And under this, these politicians, together with social media, promote an anti-elite campaign. So the elite are in their ivory tower, elites never understand the people, elite are egoistic, etc. And then journalists, professors, intellectuals, we are always attacked by demagogues and populist leaders. And the mob like them in Turkey, in America. There's another reason why we see decline. And the third thing is economic problems. So although some Americans think that we are losing the economic wealth of 1960s, 70s, in reality, we live in one of the wealthiest country. The rest of the world, because when I visit India last month and Morocco and some other countries, you see the poverty and the poverty, income inequality, and these are also challenges that minimize people's chance to appreciate and enjoy art and philosophy and other intellectualism.
You know, there was a long period of time, certainly in the 20th century, where Egypt was, and certainly predating that Egypt was the center for
Exactly.
the arts. And while Egypt remains I believe, the most populous country in the greater Middle East until you get to Pakistan, they really seem to have no longer have the same impact.
No. And another reason I didn't mention among my three: social media, populist leaders, economic problems. But since you mentioned, we can put religious radicalism, blasphemy laws, apostasy laws, not only in the Muslim world, but around the globe, religious fanaticism or ideological fanaticism. It also limits intellectualism.
So when we're coming down to just the last few minutes here of our program, and I really appreciate your perspective. I want to come back to Erdogan and who he is as a person. You know, what motivates him? How does he see the rest of his life? I think that even he knows that at some point that life comes to an end, and he transitions across to the other side. How does What are his goals in the remaining time, and will there ever be a crown prince?
That's a $1 million question. And let me also tell this, that I supported Erdogan as a democratic leader from 2002 to 2012. And at the time, it wasn't simply me, but many people, Western media, Western leaders, regard him as a potentially leading democrat of an important country that may make Turkey member of European Union. And he was doing good things. During the Arab Spring, he visited Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, asked Islamists to embrace secular constitution and the rights of atheists and other non-Muslims in their country. Now, then he changed. Now he is a different person. Istanbul Agreement, for example, about women's rights, it's called Istanbul Agreement because it was signed, an international treaty about women's rights, gender equality, signed in Istanbul with the support of Erdogan. Then, a few years later, Erdogan withdrew Turkey's signature from the agreement because of the certain religious bigots and others say this against the family values, family tradition of Turkey, this and that. You see, the change is very physical, pragmatic, You can observe it clearly, document. Some people now are telling scholars or analysts like me that you were wrong. We told you so. Islamists can never be Democrat. You should apologize, and it's your mistake. I disagree, because you can never know a person's real intention. I think he was truly pursuing a democratic agenda for his first 10 years in power. I don't assume that he had a deep, dark intentions hiding. It's politics, and politicians change. And then it's a drama for Turkey, really a tragedy, that from economically prosperous democratic decade, Turkey end up with authoritarian and economically declining decade. And yeah, if I see another politician with a democratic agenda, I would vote for that person in America or in Turkey. And then concluding by what you ask about, he doesn't have a crown prince. That's a big problem. That's why he feels himself to stay in power, in order to protect the power and wealth of his family and his cronies. We will see which way history take.
On that note, Ahmet, thank you very much for your presentation and your Q&A with the San Diego World Affairs Council today. I look forward to keeping this door open and the communication continuing. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Professor Ahmet Kuru.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions and invitation. It was my pleasure.
Goodbye, everybody.